Fox Business Alert, your home renovations just got more expensive. President Trump issuing a new set of tariffs last night. A 10% levy on imported softwood lumber and then lumber, and a 25% duty on kitchen cabinets, bathroom vanities, and upholstered furniture manufactured outside the United States. To be paid, by the way, these tariffs by U.S. companies importing these products. These tariffs are set to take effect 12:01 a.m. Eastern on October 14th. Now, let's look at some of the stocks. Maybe 6 months ago, this kind of announcement might have sent lumber and furniture stocks spiraling downward. But if you look at them right now, you've got lumber producers, Universal Forest Products and West Fraser Timber, moving slightly higher here. And then cabinet manufacturers, Masterbrand and American Woodmark Corporation, Lazy Boy, upholstered furniture maker, they're down. But, I mean, the worst is really Masterbrand, down 3%. And if you flip it over to two stocks that on Friday, when the president hinted about these tariffs on furniture, really tanked, it was Williams-Sonoma and RH. They're both up today. So the trade wars, we just don't know exactly how they will affect stocks, but they've definitely been one of the many ongoing headwinds for the Federal Reserve as the central bank faces mounting pressure from the Trump administration to further cut interest rates. So let's get to Edward Lawrence live at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, where he's got an exclusive interview with FOMC voting member, Chicago Fed President Austan Goolsbee. Edward.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. And Austan Goolsbee is a voting member. This time he is a voice. Very important normally. This year, even more so. So I guess I got to ask you first, thank you for being here. First of all.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, so the shutdown, the government shutdown. If the government shuts down, the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, will not put out a jobs report on Friday. We may not get, let's say it lasts beyond October 15th, you may not get the next inflation report. How do you make decisions on rates without that vital information?
That is vital information. Look, the Bureau of Labor Statistics is the best source of data that we have. It pains me that we wouldn't be getting official statistics at exactly a moment when we're trying to figure out, is the economy in transition? That said, just recently, the Chicago Fed introduced the labor market indicators in which, and one of those takes 11 different data sources, some of which are the official data, but many of which are private sector, and makes a real-time forecast of what the next unemployment rate would be. So we will lean heavily on our hiring rate estimates, on our layoffs and other separations rate estimate, and on our nowcast of the unemployment rate if we can't get the official
So you think
data.
It won't have an impact, or will it have an impact on making that argument as to...
Oh, it will have an impact. I mean, the more you're covering up one eye or both eyes, it's tougher to drive. So I think it will have an impact. There's no sense in which it's good. It's just these are the things that we're going to be looking at, and we're in an environment where even the best data sources are noisier than they were in the old days, and sniff everything that falls on the floor, you know, is one of the Datadog mantras. And let's just look at all the statistics that we can get.
In the dot plot, well, it shows you're forecasting 25 basis points, if you believe the Fed forecast, at each of the next two meetings. Where do you see rate cuts going? Is there going to be one at the next meeting? Are you still on that path?
You know, I don't like tying our hands or tying my own hands. The rules say I'm not supposed to speculate for what anybody else thinks or is going to do. In my own case, I like getting all the data that we can get up to the next meeting, and I like hearing what my colleagues have to say, because a lot of times they have a different worldview. That said, my view of the economy before the tariff stuff began in April was that inflation was coming down and looked to me like it was getting toward 2%, and that on the employment side of the dual mandate, it looked pretty close to full employment. So I thought rates could come down a fair amount, 100+ basis points. The increase in inflation now has thrown a little bit of a wrench in that, in my thinking. So we've been above the 2% target for 4.5 years. When we were making progress bringing inflation down, that was giving me more comfort than we're now in a circumstance where 4.5 years above and it's trending upward. Let's hope that that is a one and done thing just on goods coming from the tariffs.
Well, 7 of the dots of the 19 members showed no rate cuts at all this year. Is the Fed really divided over what to do next?
I don't. The dot plot is a snapshot at a moment in time. What do people think is going to be appropriate? It's not a promise. It's not forward guidance, and it's not literally a forecast. I think there are a lot of people take the job really seriously. If you sit around that table, everybody is trying their best to figure out what is the economic outlook and what are the economic conditions, and that's what the decisions are based on. They're coming from different places, so I'm not surprised that there would be different.
Well, the St. Louis Federal Reserve president says that he sees limited room before the policy becomes too accommodative. You're in a kind of restrictive stance now, as the Fed chairman had said. So what's your gauge between too restrictive, too accommodative? What are you looking for?
You're looking for a lot of things. I fundamentally want to see that if the inflation increase is coming predominantly from tariffs, that the tariff inflation is not going to jump out of its lane or become more persistent. We have seen a couple of warning flags in the price data where services inflation, which is not primarily driven by tariffs at all, started jumping up. If we started to see a continuation of that, I'd be pretty nervous. And on the rate side, I think it's worth remembering we lived this when rates were high and we were holding rates high while inflation was falling. Holding rates high while inflation falls is like raising. It's raising the real rate. And now, if we're holding rates steady as inflation goes up, we're actually cutting. And so I do think I'm uncomfortable front loading a whole bunch of rate cuts, counting on whatever inflation we're seeing to be transitory, given that that was exactly what it felt like the committee was doing in 21 and in 22. And that proved to be a bit of a mistake.
Right. I appreciate Austan Goolsbee. I appreciate it. So, Liz, we're going to throw it back to you. I think you have something for Austan here, don't you?
I do. Austan, thanks for joining us.
Liz, what do you got?
I got a really important one that may be a little bit tricky. You're talking about tariff inflation. Well, we already are seeing food inflation. If you look at the August food inflation, jumped 2.7% year over year last month. So my question to you is, if food prices do continue rising, and this is clearly something consumers feel every day, what possible conditions would justify you cutting interest rates? I mean, would that not hurt the credibility of the Fed when it comes to tackling inflation if you're cutting interest rates and yet food inflation is pretty much the highest we've seen since 2023?
Food inflation and several other forms of inflation. And look, Edward's out here in Chicago helping moderate. We're having our big agriculture conference here today. And the Fed normally looks at core inflation, which excludes energy and food. And that drives my mom crazy when I tell her that. She's going, what do you mean you don't look at food and energy inflation?
I'm with your mom.
That's the inflation that affects us. I do think that's partly what makes me uneasy, that we've been 4.5 years over the 2% inflation target. And there was a time we were over it, but it was coming down and down. So I was feeling somewhat confident we're on path to get to 2%. We're now in a different environment where we're both above the target and it's going the wrong way. Inflation is going up and everyone can see that. I'm out here in the Midwest talking to business leaders, and they're expressing concerns that are we going back to the environment of 21 and 22 when costs were rising out of control, the supply chain was getting disrupted. They really don't want to go back to that. I'm hoping that we're not going back to that, and that the impact of tariffs will kind of stay in their 11% of GDP lane and prove to be one and done, so that this food inflation and other inflation will not be persistent. But if we start seeing signs of that persistence, I think we got to be very careful overly front-loading rate cuts in an environment like that, because it is a threat to our credibility.
Great to have you, Austan. Thank you very much, and our thanks to Edward Lawrence as well. Austan, you may want to stand by, because with the government shutdown potentially just hours away, September jobs data, which Austan just said is crucial for the Fed to be looking at, supposed to come out Friday. It sits right in the crosshairs.